so happy to be here. I'm so happy Sarah invited me. She knows that I'm writing a book called Tending Apocalypse, which is going to be published by HarperCollins. I'm in the last throes of throwing it together. I'm really hoping the apocalypse doesn't happen before I get it out there. It would be really annoying. The main piece around what this book is about is I got really fascinated in the very beginning of the pandemic. You all had your own experiences of this. I live out in West Marin. There was crazy smoke all over the place. I had an infant that I was home with, and my lifetime of mindfulness and teaching people around the world how to relax and be more hold discernment was completely out the window. I noticed my mind I was in total sympathetic arousal. I could not discern whether I should be moving or whether I should be I lost myself. I was the guy in the grocery store frantically getting toilet paper. So I really hit that moment where I got deeply fascinated in how we as human beings meet crisis. And for some reason, I got really fascinated in the mythologies of apocalypse. I wasn't raised with any religious understanding of apocalypse. It's not something I'd ever really been fascinated with before, but I started really thinking about it, realizing that my personal relationship with death, which I know deeply in my meditation, of my capacity to be with my mortal body, with my consciousness that will disassemble, that is, core practice for me of, okay, how do I fully open to the mortality that I hold? And I started realizing, okay, I guess that's what apocalypse is on a collective scale, right? We are trying to understand, we have these mythologies throughout time about the world ending. And we're wrestling with these stories. What happens with the whole human race, the whole planet? And so I went a bit mad scientist and started studying all of the biblical, all of the indigenous mythologies from all around the world around how we make sense of crisis and collective crisis. And not only how we make sense of it, but how the stories we end up creating about it end up becoming self-fulfilling prophecies often. So I want to start by telling a story, and I would love this to be participatory. So I'm going to tell this story, and then as I'm telling you this story, what I really want to invite you to do is to listen, take it in, and try to get, where is this story living in you as I tell it? Where do you find yourself in it? Okay, this is an ancient Mesopotamian story. It's one of the very first, cuneiform stories ever written down. It's about a person named Atrahasis, who means the most wise. So Atrahasis was something of a king, but something more of a shamanic king. And he was sitting in the marshes of Mesopotamia on his reed home. And if you know there in Mesopotamia, it's still the marshes there. There's still people who live in these. It's very much like the tule that grows here. They bunch up the reeds and they make these floating homes. You can still see them there. And so he was in his floating temple, and there was a massive plague that was, destroying his people. Half of the people were dead. There was wars rising up because of it. There was, just mass starvation. And Atrahasis went and he sat on the edge of the water and he started meditating and listening to try to understand, to gain some discernment. What do I do? How do I tend to my people? And as he's sitting, the god Ea, who's the water god, comes in and goes through the reeds and speaks to him through the reeds and tells him which of the plague gods is angry. And of course, the plague gods are angry, as we see in mythologies around the world, because the humans are just being very human, and they're mining and they're cutting down, deforesting, and they're doing all of this smithing, and they're angry. And so he tells him which plague god needs to be appeased, what temple to be built, what sacrifices to be made. So Atrahasis gets all of his people, he builds this altar, they all make these sacrifices and prayers, and the plague subsides. And so then the people are healthy for a little while, some amount of years. And then all of a sudden, the people start doing what people do again. This was the very beginning at this time of domesticating animals. So they're like domesticating all these animals. They're doing all of this mining again. They're damming all the rivers. And all of a sudden, these animal plagues start happening, which actually was, when you look at the history back there, that actually was when the first zoonotic diseases started happening, because they were penning all these animals together. So all of the animals start dying. And again, there's, all the animals are dying. There's war again. It says family members are turning on family members. So he goes to the water again, and he listens. And Ea speaks to him and says, it's this god now. This god needs to be appeased. And so this keeps happening. There's a giant drought, and he goes and he listens again. He finds which elemental deity needs to be an altar for, and he gets all of his people. And so eventually, the gods are just so annoyed at the humans, because they keep, making the offerings, and then they keep doing their thing. And so Enki, the sky god, the kind of main powerful god, he's like, I've had enough of these humans. I'm going to make a giant flood the whole earth. We're going to get rid of them. And so again, Ea goes and whispers in Atrahasis' ear. He says, you need to build an ark. And here's where the story will be reminiscent. He has to build an entire ark. But it's different than Noah's. It's all made out of reeds. It's much more antique. And he needs to bring 2 by 2 all of the animals in there. He needs to bring all of his family. So Atrahasis builds this giant ark. He gets all of his community to come and do it. But then when night comes and the rain starts falling, he gets his family to come in. He has the animal. He seals it up, knowing he can't fit all of the people. It's just him, and he weeps. In the old stories, he's weeping, knowing that he all of his community is going to perish. The rains come. The entire land is flooded. The people die. They float up. And it goes from here, it goes very much Noah. They're on there for 40 days. They send out a bird eventually and finds a leaf and comes back, if you know your Bible. And eventually they come down onto the ground, and they come out and they, kiss the earth, and they're so happy to be back. And it's different than the Noah one, though. The Noah, which comes later, if you remember your Noah myth, with Noah, when he comes back, God says, I'm so sorry I did that. I'm going to give you this rainbow covenant. I'll never wipe you guys out again. I promise. That's not the more indigenous style. In the indigenous style, Enki realizes they've survived, and he's like, I'm not going to let you guys survive. You guys are terrible. I know what you're going to do. And so he's about to smite them, do something to destroy them, when the earth womb goddess, the Anima, comes forward, and she says, wait, let me make a covenant with these people. And so she goes and makes this covenant with Atrahasis, and says, okay, you're not going to overpopulate, we're going to maintain balance. And if that's the case, and so Enki's like, okay, if they make this covenant with you, we will allow you to survive. And they do, and here we are. Okay, where did that land for people? How does that live in you? What did you notice? You can just call out. Where do you find yourself in it? Where do you find us humans now in it? Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand the question. It's amusing to me
Mm-hmm.
because it's ironic.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as, where I find myself, it's just like we're so cut off from any kind of wisdom tradition as a society that we're just heading right back in the same place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The temptation and tendency to overconsume. I'm going to be really sorry for it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Surprised that we're still here.
Mm-hmm.
I believe like with the surprise as well comes like gratitude for what was and what is and what can unfold, and possibly different modalities of pathways that can align better with the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of came up for me initially is that as a process of ecological becoming, meaning it's an ongoing, it's not you're there, then you're done. It's something to be mindful of, like in the beginning of your myth that people were on track and they got off track and they had to get back on track. And so to me that echoes at the individual level and the collective level. And maybe we're, the question that shows up for me right now is, are we kind of past that point of no return? Can we get back to an ecological awareness and worldview being?
Yeah.
Also, it sounds like the sky sort of god is an angry type of god, and also the earth god is more of a helper or likes us, maybe?
Yeah. So, any other ones before?
There's somebody online saying, finding myself in shambles, desperately finding God when it's convenient for us. And then another comment, unconditional love and accountability.
Mm. Yes. Shambles. Good word. So one thing, I have an entire book here, so I'm trying to figure out how to put it in for a moment, but yeah, the shambles, I also appreciated the piece around the admission of like, oh yeah, kind of addictive shopping, like we all have this in our bodies. So one of the things that I found fascinating, so where Atrahasis is in Mesopotamia, right near Babylon, right? Babylon is a central theme in at least the Judeo-Christian apocalyptic literature, right? So Babylon, which was this flowering city of hanging gardens and seven wonders of the world, this amazing empire, right? One of the very first examples of massive empire, both the magical accumulation and wealth, and also the impact on environment and psyche. And in the Christian Book of Revelation, which is like kind of the main apocalyptic text that our modern apocalyptic rapture philosophies have come out of, they called it the horror of Babylon. It's this idea of which the old scholars pointed very clearly to. Babylon meant Rome. It basically meant this like cancerous growth of empire. And you still have, like Bob Marley has his song of Babylon's system is a vampire, and the Black Panthers called America Babylon, right? There's this, still to this day, there's this very clear thematic archetype of Babylon as the continually spreading empire. So back in the ancient literature and to the covenant piece, what I found fascinating as I was exploring this is the first apocalyptic mythologies came out of Babylon. So this was when the early Hebrews were enslaved in Babylon. If you know this story, by the rivers of Babylon, I sat down and there I wept when I remembered Zion. This is all still happening very clearly. If we look at Jerusalem and all of these places, like, it's amazing how it continues, these wars, this enslavement, this brutality. The stories are incredibly repetitive. So back then, the Hebrews were enslaved in Babylon, and what they believed was that the reason why they were there was that before, when they actually had a kingdom, they had what were called sabbatical laws, which were certain covenants that they kept with the land. And some people still try to do this, where every 7 years the land, what a sabbatical means is that the land needs to be not cultivated. It needs to be left fallow. And every 50 years there's a jubilee where all debts are remitted, all slaves are freed. Basically, it's this like giant zeroing out. If you know from different indigenous traditions, this happens in a lot of different cultures where you're having these regular moments on the clock where things are kind of recycled, right? There's like, okay, we can't get too top heavy, both with the earth and socially. We need to keep covenants culturally and collectively so we watch against our narcissism, right? So people, even back then, thousands and thousands of years ago, they were like, oh, we got to keep this covenant with the earth womb goddess, where pretty regularly we gotta return. If we take this much, we got to give back that much, right? And you really clearly in Ezekiel and Isaiah and all these old apocalypse prophets, what they say is the reason that their temple collapsed, the reason that the plagues of apocalypse come, is when they break these particular covenants, right? Which is very much the ancient, most indigenous cultures have this very clear archetypal theme. If you break your covenant with the land, if we take too much, the land rises up against us, right? It says really clearly, if you don't keep the covenant, eventually the earth will take it from you, right? A COVID will come or whatever, right? Like climate change will come, right? These things are the earth snapping back when we have not kept this back and forth. You said the thing about the earth god and the earth god and the sky god, and a lot of what I've been exploring in this book is this idea of there's two main apocalyptic stories, mythologies that you can look at. It's a simplification, but there's the kind of upward sky god rapture stories that are pretty recent. Like even the old Christian apocalypse stories, in the Bible, if you look at the whole Bible, they never talked about heaven as a place that we would all go to. That's a later Christian development around this idea, or at least in terms of rapture, that like the world would end and everybody would leave. And originally it was the idea which holds some of the antique idea that there will be a new Jerusalem here, right? The world, Rome, Babylon will collapse, and a new world will be made here on the earth, right? It's only later, as the development that Janine was talking about, slowly this idea goes, oh no, we just need to get out of here, right? We want the earth to be destroyed. We want to take off. This completely upward momentum. We're not giving back. We don't need to give back. We're going to take all of this, whatever. While the indigenous traditions, or pretty much all ancient mythologies, it's all about this cyclical death and rebirth, right? The story is about, everything is swallowed up, and then Coyote needs to go in and cut a hole in the monster to be able to bring all the animals back out, and apocalypse happens every year, and we participate with it, so that death and rebirth, our participation with the death and rebirth of the world keeps everything churning, keeps us healthy, keeps the world healthy. right? So it's a very different. One's linear, terminating. One is about cycles, right? I'm really interested in terms of that. Like, I love that here at this ecopsychology conference, the idea that we have of my body, my psyche, our social world, and ecology as integrated systems, right? On some level, I think that's what ecopsychology is about. And understanding that addictive mind that is all kind of anxious and up, kind of like if you look at what the sympathetic arousal looks like in our bodies, right? It's all of the chemicals and fuel get basically mined up and put into the system. I can feel it as I'm talking. And all of the thoughts get anxious and kind of upward, right? And basically what's our minds become very dual, binary, right? You're not able to kind of, you lose our nuance. And when that happens, we end up shopping, we end up going to war with each other, we end up having conflict, right? We literally can't have empathy when we're in a sympathetic response, right? We literally can't, whether we're empathic with another human or to be able to be aware of our natural system, right? Where it's just me. And so we see that how climate change on some level is a massive sympathetic response, right? Like it's all literally carbon rising upwards and not being drawn down into the earth, which is a direct response to our minds and bodies, right? And all of the ecological teaching is that we need drawdown, right? We need to actually, we need the similar amount, we need to, it's not that the sky god is bad. It's not that transcendence is bad. It's not that this kind of awakeness, right, upwards is bad. It's that there needs to be the continual reciprocal movement. And so the literal experience of us when we're trying to do mindfulness or yoga or like slow down back into the body, like regulation practices, right? So there's the personal and collective drawdown. And so I'm very much interested in how the stories we tell about collapse, around crisis, they're, on some level, they're created by our frenetic techno world, but then also the stories support a different personal nervous system and collective system. So I'm really interested in how we can turn towards these more stories, because even us as you know, environmental, social justice, like even, you know, these things that we know are so profoundly important, we feel in our hearts, we can easily get into them as binary, linear apocalypse stories. Everything's gonna end. Right, so and that we know what that does, right? So it's how do we come back into this in our own bodies and with each other, these more generative tending stories. We know that, I'll just end with and then take some questions. And we know the sympathetic arousal, right? You probably all know about the tend and befriend reflexes, right? So there's like the fight, flight, and freeze responses, which were researched by men in the 30s on men, and it wasn't until like the 90s that women started, you know, that it was, we were like, let's actually research how women respond to crisis, right? And there's like, oh wow, there's a whole other way that people can respond, where there's more actual, like, if meeting the challenge with compassion and actually taking care of a community. And so more of this anima style, like, okay, what would it look like if our stories and our responses to these crises weren't just like shooting on a rocket out somewhere else, or more tariffs, or whatever, you know, like, okay, what would it mean if we actually were able to get into stories that we don't have to look far. These stories are right here, these amazing, ancient, and still current stories around how how we roll with the death and rebirth cycles. Okay, that's a snapshot of what I've been thinking about, and I would love to hear some questions, some comments, just kind of be in it with you all.
I think I was gonna go first.
Oh, go ahead, Judy, please.
I just wanted to say I really enjoyed that, and it's mostly just comments to what you shared. There was actually a class here a while back that Craig Chalquist taught on applied folklore and also parapsychology, and he talked a lot about this idea of addressing the crisis that we're in through enchantivism, in other words, through storytelling. So just really appreciated that that's the route that you took. And then maybe one other thing, as you were speaking, I was thinking of integral yoga as well, because I feel like in probably many yogas, but particularly in integral yoga, this idea of sort of it not being about ascension necessarily, but about like evolution here, like together. So just appreciating a lot of what you brought in today. No questions, just wanted to say that.
Totally, yeah, the Aurobindo work, the traditions that are doing that, you know, if it's a microcosmic orbit or whatever it is, you know, or like I love because even a lot of our Buddhist traditions, I don't think this is the essence of what Buddha meant, but it can be very much about how do I break the cycle, right? It's literally how do I break the wheel and get out of this wheel, right? But then what you moves to is the bodhisattvic vow, which is I am able to transcend, and then immediately I'm able to come right back in and say, I'm not done until we're all done, right?
Thank you, Daniel. I feel really stirred, and I have a lot moving, in my body and my heart from your talk. I'm really appreciative for your share, and I'm excited to read your book as well. Hopefully it happens before the apocalypse as well, but maybe I'll get an advanced copy. There's a lot. I'm really kind of struck by that idea of kind of moving into thought, into more, or even like sort of rationalism or enlightenment and just the way that we experience that movement upwards and out when we are going into our heads is sort of like almost like an escape from an imminence, like sort of just an unconscious movement away from the earth. I think that really struck me. And I was also really struck by the covenants, like these 7-year cycles, the land Sabbath, and it just feels like that's something like that our culture really needs, is almost like the Saturnian principle, like this yoking, this limit, like this, because in this movement upwards, there's this like sort of feeling of this like limitlessness of the air and the sky versus the yoking of the earth. And it feels like, I guess part of me feels excited by that, and then part of me feels a little bit hopeless about that, because it just feels so far. This idea of having limitations, of having indebtedness, with other beings, feels like it's the opposite of where our society is right now. And part of me, when I heard that story, part of me is like, man, Enki should have ended it, like that, or that, and that like earth goddess, like, how did she get so naive? So that's a part of me, not all of me, that had that reaction. And so I guess maybe a question out of all of that is, so we can do these practices to, kind of realign our own centers and bring in the downward movement and bring in these covenants into our own lives. And I see people doing that through spiritual practice. And then there's like activism, which, sometimes, as you say, is really, can just exacerbate the problem. What's like the middle way between sort of just, because I like just doing our own thing and being like, okay, well, I found my center, like, whatever, I'll be the change and that'll just make impact, or doing a sort of unconscious form of activism where we're exacerbating a problem. But how do we, I think that's my that's the inquiry, like, how do we find that middle place?
Yeah, I'm very much with you in all of that. I don't exactly have an answer. I do have, I mean, something that for me personally has been really interesting as I've been immersed. I've been writing this book for 5 years, and I've been like deeply immersed in stories of apocalypse and crisis and collapse. And I'm way more relaxed at this point. I'm way less worried. And part of it, why? So part of it is that I'm not at all less, I don't think that collapse, it's not like I'm more hopeful that it's not gonna happen, but I do feel way more like, yeah, this is the world. This has been the world we've lived in. Yes, it's heightening and exacerbating, but like, just be a student of history, like, it's been like this for thousands and thousands of years, and I think there's a way, at least I'm like, the imminence, I'm not actually as much trying to escape the reality and be like, how do we fix this? How do we change it? And so the two pieces that you said, I feel like are continually our questions, right? Like, how do we engage as deeply as we can to try to help those in need and suffering? But for me, the moment that I lose myself and leave myself and go up, and I'm doing it from up here, I need to stop and I need to come back and find how to be in myself. And there's moments where it's like, I can tend my son and my wife and my land, and that's about it. Anything beyond that, I'm like, I'm out of my range. And then there's moments where I'm like, okay, I'm coming and giving this talk. I'm going and doing, and like, oh yeah, I think this is in my range. And then, okay, shit, back to. So I don't. I feel like I'm finding way better within myself how to stay grounded while trying to do good work in the world. That's the best I'm learning.
Thank you.
Just two comments that are related, and one of them is response to what you just said. I've also been thinking about this for a while, and the way I frame it is usually an addiction to getting away, like addiction to escape addiction, basically, which is driven by fear of death. And so what you just said totally makes sense in that context. Like, you're not reacting. When there's not a reaction just perpetuates the problem. It's just more of ascent, got to get out of here, we got to fix this, which eventually becomes the whole space program to like find another planet to exploit and destroy. And the earth is about death. When we die, we just go into the earth. So that's part of the reaction. It's just to get away from the earth because it reminds us unconsciously of our death. But I just wanted to also thank you for your historical work in noticing that there were the more cyclic attitudes toward, okay, sometimes we just have to let go and stop the attempt to like higher and higher and better and better and better, and just go back into the system. And it basically, it's a non-egoic stance. It's like, okay, we're not gonna like rise above and get better and better and better. We're part of this, and just accept that instead of trying to escape it. And I wasn't aware of all the historical narratives and plans that had that as a central myth. So it was great to be reminded of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can call on Nathan here. And you're able to ask your question.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm appreciating this conversation. And I'm thinking about what Jung wrote in After the Catastrophe, and how he was kind of basically calling for individuals to like renew their relationship to God. And so like a lot of the time, I get the sense that the gods are kind of asking humanity to wake up, right, through these this cycle of apocalypse. And so, yeah, I get the feeling a lot of the time that we're like looking at what actions we can take on the outside, and this idea of activism, and kind of going back to like, what about more like, I don't know, internal or spiritual activism, where we're, as individuals, right? Like that's our main focus isn't to patch up what's going on in the outer world, but to, yeah, sort of cultivate, really kind of spend our lives cultivating a strong relationship to nature inside of us as individuals, and kind of turning the rest over, and yeah, kind of having faith and surrendering to that.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll end with just one other quick piece around. I mean, a lot of people. The word apocalypse. Some of you probably know it comes originally from the word to reveal, right? So, kalypton is like a veil or a covering. So apo is uncovering, and that was much as the person who was just speaking was talking to, right? Like waking up, apocalypse, death, crisis as this wake up. But if you go deeper, I go deep into this in my book around, if you go deeper into the word, just not the apocalypse, just the calypse, there's all of these interesting ancient gods that have that as their beginning. And like Calypso from the Odyssey is, her name Calypso just means like a veil or covering, or originally it was like an earth goddess. It was a kind of a god of the unknown ground. And if you know that story, the story is of Odysseus, the warrior, the conqueror, his boat being destroyed and going to Calypso, and her taking him in for 7 years, so he's 7, and him just grieving for 7 years in order to be remade, right? So there's all of these old stories around that, around the not the apocalypse, which is more of the lift up, right? But the Calypso teaching, the goddess teaching of, yeah, we need to grieve, we need to let ourselves fall apart and die, as you're saying, right? That as even like ecologically, that will help if we allow that that mythology. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your attention.